Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 585th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Corinne Davis and Shirley Kaneda and hosted by Steel Stillman. We'll conclude with a PennSound video recording of Julie Patton reading a poem. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wapengr, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions. The Brooklyn Rail would like to thank Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive. You can view today's event and our full archive on the Rail's YouTube channel. You'll now see the acknowledgement and daily link in the chat. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest and host. Based in Brooklyn, Corinne Davis is a painter exploring the complex relationship between race, culture, classification, and contingency. Born in Baltimore, Davis received a BFA from Pratt and an MFA from Hunter College. Her paintings have been exhibited across the US and are included in the collections of many notable museums. Corinne Davis is the recipient of many awards as well. Artist Shirley Kaneda was born and raised in Tokyo and is a naturalized American. She received her BFA from Parsons. Kaneda has had more than 25 solo shows internationally. She's a writer and contributing editor for Bomb magazine and the recipient as well of many awards internationally. And our host, based in New York, Steel Stillman, is an artist and writer with recent exhibitions in New York, the Netherlands, and Italy. His books and catalogs include Analogy and Black Point, published by Hasla. Stillman teaches in the MFA Photography, Video, and Related Media department at the School of Visual Arts and is a contributing editor at Art in America. And with that, it's my pleasure to pass the mic over to Steel Stillman.
Well, thank you, Chloe. And thank you, right at the beginning, well, thank you, Lisa and Shirley for being part of this. And thank you to the Rail for hosting, and to Kara Carmack at the Studio School for helping with the images, which we've sort of cobbled together a slideshow using her images, my images, and some images that the artists provided. So the way we're gonna do this today is we're just gonna start out with a bit of a walkthrough of the show, kind of move through the space at the Studio School, which might be most people know. The New York Studio School is on 8th Street in Manhattan. And then Shirley and Lisa will join me basically in kind of talking individually a little bit at first about their own work. The show is called Dual, D-U-A-L. Actually, I'm gonna start sharing my screen now. We're sharing. Let's see if this works. Okay, you can all see that, right? The show is called Dual, of course, with an A, not with an E. And I mean, I think it's really pretty much conceived as two solo shows. There are certainly relationships, or there are relationships between the work of both, but they are also very independent artists making kind of quite different work. And I think hopefully this conversation will tease out some of that stuff. So I'm going to just start really with a walkthrough here, and you know, certainly Shirley and Lisa, please feel free to add in. Especially this first part is really just kind of an introduction, but you know, if I get something wrong or if there's something you want to elaborate at this point. So we enter through a kind of little vestibule here. And then the first room that we're in is devoted to Shirley's paintings. And I'm just gonna kind of show you a combination of these installation shots, these two paintings straight ahead, and then I'll identify each of them individually. This one is called, well, first I should say maybe that all of Shirley's work are acrylic and vinyl on canvas. When you say vinyl, Shirley, does that mean that you're talking about flash paint?
Yes.
Yes. So acrylic paint and something that's called flash, F-L-A-S-C-H-E, it's a kind of a sort of acrylic-like, but it's actually vinyl-based, very, very matte paint. So all of her works are acrylic and vinyl on canvas. And many of them are sort of, 64 inches high, 64 inches high. One of them is a little bit shorter, and about between 44 and 54 inches wide. So this one is called Imaginary Pretension. It's from 2022. This one is called Composed Disparity from 2021. So there you see those first two on the left, and then coming to this corner, the next one is, okay, this is actually the end of the room there. And this one there on the left is Precarious Permanence from 2022. It's 64 by 44. And next to it is Ambivalent Resolution from 2021. It's a little wider. This one and the next one are both 64 by 54. The first measurement, of course, is the vertical. And then again, the corner. And this next, that painting on the right is Anecdotal Impartiality from 2022. And then we're sort of looking back toward that vestibule where you enter. And on the right there is the final painting. It's a little smaller, 48 inches high by 33. It's called Compassionate Malice from 2022. So that sort of, ends the sort of the first room. And as you see, then the first room kind of opens into the second. I mean, this is for, I know many of you have actually been either at the show or in this space before. But now we're looking, of course, at Lisa's work. And actually to the left, this is sort of the head-on view of what you see as you come to that opening. But then to the left, and I actually do want to say, so now we're looking at Lisa's paintings. Don't trust so much the way the proportions of the photograph, especially in these angled views, because as I say, we were kind of cobbling them together out of photos that Cara and I shot on our iPhones, and so there's a bit of distortion involved. Like this painting on the left is actually not square, as you'll see in the next image. It's a bit more rectilinear. All of Lisa's work are oil on canvas. And this one is 50 by 40 inches. It's called Deliberate Deceit from 2020. And the one kind of down at the end there is Foundational Flim Flam from 2021. It's smaller, it's about 26 inches by 20 inches wide. And then the corner again, and the painting on the right from 2022. There are two paintings at the end there. That painting, so now it's the painting on the left, is called Measured Ploy, 2022. It's 60 inches by 45 inches wide. And to the right is, this painting is Hypnotic Hypothesis. This may be the largest of Lisa's paintings. It's 70 inches high by 55 wide. Hypnotic Hypothesis from 2022. And again, sort of making the corner. This is that, I don't know, I guess this would be probably the east wall of the gallery. The painting on the left, this one is called Disruptive Deductions from 2021. It's 42 inches high by 34 inches wide. And another sort of largish one. And the first painting sort of chronologically in the show, it's from 2017. It's called Cerebral Calibration. As I said, 60 by 45, I think I said. So then this sort of shows you that. And the last painting there, the seventh painting in the corner, is called Actual Adage it's also from 2022, and it's 40 inches by 30 inches. And that kind of brings us back, yeah, to this other sort of photo that shows you how these two spaces relate. So Shirley and Lisa, was that okay? Just sort of to give people a sense? Yeah.
Sure.
That's great.
So now we're really just kind of, I'd like to sort of talk with each of the artists individually, Shirley first here, about their work in a bit more, from their perspective. And Shirley, I suppose we could kind of start either talking about, we could talk about color, or we could talk about shape. Maybe we just sort of talk about colors and, I don't know, how you start paintings, maybe how you kind of get them going, what this kind of grammar of shapes and color that you use, however you want to present.
I do start with drawings, studies of paintings. They used to be fairly, close to the finished painting, but now the drawings are actually much looser, and they're not so resolved. And it's when I start making the paintings that things are worked out. So the drawing that I started with, this painting, for example, didn't have a lot of the elements that you see in the painting. I may have even not had, the edges in terms of how they framed the painting. I might have had one and not the other one, but so it's really through the painting that a lot of the resolutions, come through the painting. And it's the same with the colors. I may have some idea of the colors, but you just really don't know until you start and see it, on the canvas in a different scale next to, one color next to the other. So you really have to adjust while you're painting.
I mean,
yes.
No, go ahead.
No, but I do, I have something to start with. I don't look at an empty painting and start, a white canvas and start. That's just not the way I work.
And I mean, one of the things that's so sort of characteristic of them, in addition to the color and the shape, are sort of how the edges are often very sharp, and the whole thing is sort of put together in a kind of marquetry. I'm just going to move on to the next one. A kind of, I don't know, marquetry, or there's something for all the kind of, as you say, the drawing, and then the evolution from the drawing, and then not knowing. There's a lot that we don't sort of see of that in the final work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
And while I'm making the painting, I do go back to drawings and may test out, certain solutions that I have in mind, and sort of imagine what it may look like on the canvas. So I use the drawing as a way to experiment and see the different options. And it's just, it's impossible, I think, to follow some sort of a prescriptive way of making paintings that I don't want them to just sort of end up being, just about some image that you can immediately grasp. I want the paintings to actually have a temporalness, so that it takes time for the viewer to see what they're looking at, and to understand what's going on. And it's the same for me when I'm making them. I have to see what's going on, and then I make certain decisions based on that. So it's very much,
back and forth
process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And there, I mean, I'm sure viewers noticed as we were kind of going through the whole set of paintings, there's a fair amount of repetition or recurrence that occurs, especially, sort of within a series. I know you work a lot in series, and I mean, for instance, there are certain motifs like this shape here on the right, which is a little, is sort of echoed over here, perhaps upside down, maybe not, and and that and this sort of quite vertical architecture or banding sort of recur. And I'm just sort of wondering about this shape, perhaps in particular, because it's both, in the sort of old-fashioned parlance, maybe it's both abstract and not. It's it certainly is suggestive. It makes me think of sort of architectural references, or I don't know, like scientific models, or something out of a Man Ray or a Magritte painting, maybe. But it also has a kind of figural possible stand-in, and I know it's important to you not to pin those things down, but maybe could you just talk a little bit about how these shapes, how you sort of settle perhaps on those shapes?
Well,
motifs
yeah,
maybe.
Initially, I think I was looking for a way to disrupt the sort of verticality of the painting, the sort of the geometry of these bands. And so I was looking for a way to interfere with that and to introduce something that might be considered antithetical to it. And at the same time, I wanted, because of the vertical bands are so regular, I wanted something irregular to counter that. And it's also, I think, something to do with my body and the way I don't think of myself as a performative painter, but I do, think about my body when I'm painting. Not think about it per se, but I'm conscious of it in terms of how the paint is applied and so on. So to a certain degree, it might have some relationship to the figure, but it also, is, like you said, it could signal something that's biomorphic. So in some ways, it's all a kind of archaeology of abstract painting's history,
right?
Limited, but
right, and that, and also, I mean, as you said, I mean, just again, just thinking for a minute about the body, that's also, I think, in a sense, there's a mirroring of in the structure of the painting itself. All of these paintings are vertical paintings. They're sort of about the size of a body, or or they seem to sort of refer or relate. And I think, as a viewer or perceiver, you sort of have this kind of almost bodily sense of it. You're in a space that's quasi architectural. It's very spatially kind of it's both flat and deep. It's flat in terms of the way the pattern is organized on the picture plane, but then you create a certain kind of depth in a number of ways. I mean, one, by having these different textures, like, for instance, this sort of brushy kind of texture, visual texture. They're very flat, the paintings, that seems to recede, and then use this very opaque flat matte paint, or even a flat gloss, which sort of declares the picture plane. And then there are these, I wanted to talk for a little bit about, in a number of these paintings, you have these sort of smaller frames within, like this one. Let me hear, maybe we'll do a close-up, that almost suggests what, sort of like viewing frames, or another, like a window into, how did those emerge, maybe within these paintings? Actually, maybe I'll flip to the next painting, because the next painting has it as well.
Yeah, I think this was the first painting that I made using these rectangles and squares within at the existing geometry. And so I wanted them to echo the geometry that's present in the paintings, but at the same time have its own identity. So it can be seen as being part of the overall geometry of the painting, but at the same time, it's separate. And at the same time, I'm trying to use the space or the area that is created by these kinds of curves and these shapes that are also related to this other type of shape. But I wanted them to not be the same color, because then it would be read as part of this other shape. So what I'm trying to do with all of my paintings is to sort of create an identity for the parts of the paintings. So even though the parts are made to create a whole in the end, the parts are not neglected or suppressed in order to make the complete painting. I want each of the elements to have an identity on its own, and at the same time they are interdependent. So they create a relationship between the parts.
I mean, and yeah, I mean, sort of forgive me for interrupting. So I was just zoom in on this, but when you started to talk about this this other shape, I was sort of thinking especially about this sort of flame motif that we have here, which is painted very differently from almost anything in any of the other set of this work here, because it has this kind of obviously this sort of rounded illusionistic quality. And could you maybe just talk about that, just how, and the introduction of that almost alien element? I mean, it's alien.
It is. I mean, I was sort of trying to see what would work there, despite the fact that logically something like that shouldn't work in a painting like this. But I wanted to see if I could sort of get away with it in a way. And it's definitely painted sort of with much more volume intentionally, because I wanted to differentiate between that shape and the rest of the painting. And I think what I'm trying to do is to see what a painting can actually hold and still function as a complete structure.
Mm-hmm. So let's keep going. That's good. Okay, so the next, let's see, this one and this one. These are wider paintings. This one in some ways similar, I don't know, seems different to me than this one. I don't know, and perhaps it has to do with the color scheme, but there's a quality of, I don't know, atmosphere and color and weather that, maybe it's the quality of the light that the pink and the yellow and these sort of bands create, that's quite different from the sort of, I don't know, I'm going to just go back a little bit, from the kind of more sort of abstract or I don't know, theoretical kinds of spaces of those earlier paintings. And I wonder, do you think of it that way, or am I completely projecting in, which is possible?
I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking about the difference between this painting, for instance, and this painting in terms of a kind of color atmosphere, or, do you see them in any different way, or?
I think that the other three paintings that are of the same size, are probably more similar to one another, because the motifs are repeated in the three paintings. And with these two, actually there was a lot more improvisation going on while I was painting them. So I had to switch gears many times actually to complete the painting. And so it just sort of took on its own life. And I wasn't really thinking about, making a consistent painting with the other paintings. And these two actually, I think, came first. This is actually what you said 2022, but it's actually 2021.
Okay. I'm just looking at the list.
It's a different size. It's wider, so it also created a different spatial problem for me in terms of how to resolve them.
Right. Okay, so I think thanks, Shirley. I think I'm kind of going to switch a little here to Lisa, and then we'll come back and pick up with you again. So Lisa, hi.
Hi.
I wonder if we could just then talk a little bit about your images, your paintings, and your sort of image grammars. They're obviously, in a sense, they're abstract paintings in the way that Shirley's are, but in a very different way, actually, because they are well, I don't know, maybe you should talk about them. I mean, I don't want to set it up sort of as a duel with an A. It's but these are they're looser, they're more organic, or looser looking, they're more organic. They have a different kind of architecture. We've talked about nets and maps, and I don't know, perhaps not so much about shape, but it's about pattern. How do you begin?
Well, completely unlike Shirley, I don't draw before I make a painting because I think of them as conversant, and I always think how you make a painting is what it is in the end. So like a conversation that's begun, I start somewhere and listen or hear or respond to what begins to happen. So I want this kind of reactive from one point to another in the painting to be speaking to each other. Thus, that's why the paintings don't really look the same. They use a vocabulary, which I think is, again, in my mind, a little different than a motif. And when I say a vocabulary, I'm talking about vocabularies in painting. In one sense, the modernist vocabulary in painting, the grid, which I try to take off kilter to make it less structural, less reliable, less measurable. So it folds into, as you referred to, Steel, this netting process, which is much less surface driven and more malleable and movable.
If you don't mind, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm just going to maybe flip.
Sure.
Kind of give a little bit of just a detail of that one.
Mm-hmm. So like in every move I make, I try to take it a little further so it doesn't mean what it's supposed to, what it's structured to mean. Trying to, in a sense, parallel this. This is driven from my own experience of a kind of code switching that one does as a minority person when you go into a situation. You read what's going on and you try to pick up the signs, and you go from there in how to communicate or how to be in this situation. So I believe in painting that there are these things that we read, even in abstract painting, as either measurable, reliable, substantial, trustworthy. And there's things we read as psychological and organic, and so I try to take those different aspects of painting and twist it into the other zone. Trying to put the onus on the viewer of their responsibility in creating a situation, a meaning, a location in the paintings. I don't want them to be traditional windows where everything's happening there, but I want to put some of the pressure back on the viewer, making them conscious that they're making conscious decisions about what's going on based on the decisions they know, the places they know, the places they've been, the things they've interacted with.
Exactly. I mean, it is. We certainly. Of course, this is probably true of every artwork and viewer relationship. That we do bring our associations and I don't know, sort of associations and maybe sort of visual meanings to what we're seeing. But this fact, it's interesting the way you talk about the grid sort of being opened into both organic sort of structures and processes, because those kinds of associations, for me, we'll get to the psychological in a minute, but the organic qualities, the way this sort of geometry becomes, more elastic, but maybe more also like, neural nets or these representations of data, the things that you used to see in Scientific American that have become kind of like real now, the kind of the mapping of information and the movements of information. So I see a lot of that. And then I also start to think about maybe the sort of what happens as the grid becomes loses its Euclidean order and becomes this other kind of space. I don't really know where the question is in that. Maybe possibly thinking about in terms of color would help, because we've talked a little, you and I, Lisa, talked a little bit about color. I've heard you talk in other spaces about your uses of color, because you're not using altogether primary. You move very quickly from having primary colors into these sort of secondaries and tertiaries, and you often refer to them as toxic colors. And I find that's an interesting adjective. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about your use of color.
Sure.
Also,
certainly in this painting that's up now, I think of that yellowish, greenish color as anywhere from some spectacular occurrence in nature to a kind of, something that's, toxic. So, that breadth of potential read is something I'm interested in. But back to, I guess I'm questioning overall in the work, knowledge, like how can we trust knowledge? Like what is truth, right? So, and in painting, I guess back to the color aspect still is, I think we don't question primary colors. Like we don't question them as they are just kind of factual. Thus signage uses primary colors. It's not something we're supposed to feel from. So, I play with that notion of this is something that is coded for us to trust. And then I try to, again, slip it stage by stage away from that. Like if I twist that just a little bit, where are we at? If I take it even further, where are we at? How far can I take it so that it becomes, the other end of the scope of read. So, that's how I guess that's how I have fun in the studio.
Yeah.
Idea of a good time.
I also kind of want to look at a few details in a couple of your paintings as well, because they're surprising in a way. It's, it makes me think about how perhaps not how many different image grammars you bring in. And so there's this sort of, especially this kind of, I don't know, river of it could be sort of expressionist color or sort of procedural color that seems quite different from the more, I don't know, playful / cerebral. I mean, not that this isn't playful, but maybe could you sort of talk about, sort of the introduction of an element like that, or where that's coming from?
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things I try to play with overall in the paintings is the notion of scale from micro to macro. So when you've got something that's factual, like a physical mark on a canvas, it has a one-to-one relationship to a scale relationship. But I also am interested when I'm thinking about how we orient in relationship to maybe a loose notion of identity. I also think about painting identity, the difference between a hard-edged, geometric painter to an expressionist painter, to a landscape painter. So I try to have color and mark and surface go to all those zones or reach to those zones. So some of the paintings have a notion of like a light and air, and some of them are like really surface measured, and others are of the body of that gestural mark.
Right. So I think that's good. I just want to clarify where that close up that we just saw is in the lower left of this painting. But let me also kind of move on then to another painting. Though, yeah, this is one of my favorites. Not that I don't want to really declare favorites, but I mean, here you're doing also some interesting things. You're working as you do in other ones. You work a lot with the edge and the frame, like this sort of. Is it black or dark blue? I kind of forget how this edge.
Black,
yeah, and it's sort of as though the image both sort of pivots a little bit within the frame, almost like a kind of slightly misregistered photograph or something. But then you do other things like this implied vertical line down the middle there with these sort of like opaque blobs, and referencing the frame, also referencing the surface, like all these little square or rectangle things, in the corners and then throughout, that sort of sit again on the picture plane and sort of play against the more illusionistic depth of the nets. I mean, I kind of get the sense of play that you're describing that must come out of the making, but maybe could you walk us through this particular set of decisions about the frame and then these little motifs and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying about the conversation, like anything that starts to set up a situation that we think we understand, like the surface, the edge, the web, the divide. I'm trying to disrupt the viewer, like, that you can't rely on that. Something else has shifted here. And so, for a while, I've been thinking about, well, we expect the edge of the painting to respond and to be something like, a window or object. And so, and everything within it functions within those frameworks. So this edge work this off-kilter thing I've been doing is just disrupting that expectation again. Trying to get the viewer to readjust themselves. I'm constantly trying to make the viewer readjust any sense of stability from what they think they know, because the longer I hope they stay with the painting, something else will appear that makes them reassess the whole situation. So that split in the center of the painting is very it's a line essentially with two things happening on different sides. So it should be a flat division of a surface of a painting, but with what's going on behind it and the two different variations of color, right to left, for me, it's hard to tell where I am spatially, where to locate,
Right.
whether I'm looking at something straight on in a kind of, you know, facade kind of way, or whether I'm flying over or inside something.
Yeah.
And that all gets disrupted because of, well, then there's this kind of this image based on those edges of the frame within the painting. So I have to readjust again. I just want them to be completely destabilizing.
Yeah, I mean, there is something about a kind of hovering point of view, or aerial or shifting point of view, or complexity of point of view that, again, is sort of one of the things I think that sets your work and Shirley in sort of in somewhat different realms. I just want to, I guess I had this detail image here. Maybe there are a couple of details of what we were just talking about, which I probably should have shown you all guys a minute ago. Yeah, this painting, I'm kind of keeping my eye a little bit on the clock, but how about, yeah, because could we talk about this one then, maybe just for a minute in terms of that point of view, Lisa? I mean, in terms of its complexity of spaces, or even, yeah, sort of associations. It's built more out of a sort of a whole group of sort of rectangular, like, I don't know, almost like line doodles that kind of do a sort of jagged thing. And
yeah,
I know.
I'm sorry we don't have a better picture of this one because I haven't photographed it yet, because the color in this is kind of important. But I'm not sure still I have much more to say, because the same strategies are in place.
Yeah.
You know, and there's little things like the lower left-hand bottom of this painting, which would appear to be a portal to some background or internal space, gets disrupted by these green shapes that actually go over I'll call it the netting zone, which push it forward. And then again, often within these things that feel geometric, which should sit on the surface of the painting, they're very painterly. And in this case, they have a physicality, a variation of tone. So they're gestural in a sense, but they're gestural in the geometry, and the geometry is not sitting where it should. And the other thing I will say is this painting, which is impossible to read in this slide, is starting with a kind of gradation glazing. So from the top to the bottom. So it's darker and lighter, warmer and hotter. So already there's a kind of muscle, a kind of color muscle that's making the surface vibrate, not stay still. This is something that's new, that's happening in the paintings, that from the get-go, the underpainting is already just kind of starting to create a kind of movement of that surface.
That kind of space.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, just because I am a little conscious of time, we have a couple of very, probably, I'm afraid, not very high res early images of yours, but which I don't even know how much we need to talk about them, but I just want to show a couple of things. These are sort of what, collage based, Lisa?
Correct.
From book pages?
Yeah. And I would say the similarity here is the grid and kind of shifting off of that has always been a thing. Like
this is a detail of that, just
revolution against the grid, I guess. I don't know.
And again, this is I guess it's a little later, right? That's 97. This is 2001.
Correct.
This is kind of amazing. I mean, It's quite beautiful. Maybe also in, are these still book pages?
Yeah, these are all book pages that of different languaged history books that are colored in different shades of brown. Silhouettes of different heads are cut out. They're overlapped, and then portions are repainted. You know, this was probably like this earlier work, a little more literal of a way of speaking about potentially cultural and racial expectations, and trying to destabilize that with these windows that don't really get filled in, and the silhouette and color and value here are meaningless really to the assumptions of what's on the page or what the person might represent.
So that's good. And then also in a similar way, I'd like to want to come back a little bit to the sort of, the maybe identity question, but I just want to just quickly also ask Shirley a couple of things about these early paintings of hers. I think I forgot to write down the actual dates. This is early 90s though. These paintings are on your website, Shirley, and I just thought it was striking how in some way the architectonic of your work was established quite a while ago. What's happening with that sort of architecture, or this sort of, maybe, is it a way of working? How would you describe it?
Well, I think I considered myself a sort of geometric abstract painter, but not a straightforward one. And I think it's problematic to what I was interested in was to sort of extend the limitations of what we know as abstract paintings, particularly in geometry. And so it was always about using that history, but sort of upending it, turning it upside down somehow. And it's not necessarily to poke fun at it or anything like that. It's more about, as I said, to see how you can extend this vocabulary. And it's not about reinventing the wheel or anything like that in terms of geometric abstract paintings. But I think that because we live in a different time, we're constantly changing. And I personally come from a non-Western background, and I didn't grow up looking at Western art. It was only when I came to New York in 1970 that I started looking at Western art. So my visual references are very different.
Right.
And so I think, it was almost natural for me to, even though I was compelled to geometric abstraction, it was almost natural for me to see how I could use it differently, how I can sort of dispel, the rules or prohibitions of what was considered to be abstract geometric paintings.
Yeah. And just to show, a couple of more that maybe, it's not as though, one of the reasons I showed that first one is because there was such a significant kind of, or there was some sort of an affinity with the more recent work. There were also, there's other work that sort of veers. And one of the reasons I picked this one is because in an odd way, it also connected to Lisa's work, it seemed to me, or at least it showed part of the sort of the range of your experiments or your explorations over the course of this last, 25, 30 years. And here's another one. This, I think, is like 2008 or 10.
No, it's like more recent. It's
18 maybe.
20, 20.
Yeah.
17 or 18. Yeah.
Okay. Now I think maybe, I don't know whether you want me, Chloe, whether I should keep this image on. We're not ready for audience Q&A quite yet, although we're definitely looking forward to that. but I kind of wondered if we could focus on some sort of general questions. Do you think it's better to leave an image like this up, or just kind of go to us, stop sharing maybe, and have
Whichever you think.
let's stop sharing. Let's I think it's good to be able to see people a little. So actually, I sort of have I have a couple of questions maybe for both you, Lisa and Shirley. Maybe one of them, just because it has come up, is the question of identity and abstraction, possibly. I mean, it's significant to me that at a time when so much work having to do with identities, the identities of the artist, the identities of perhaps audience members, visual audience, that so much of that work is sort of figural and narrative-ish and representational. And you both, whether because of your generation, our generation, or for reasons actually I'm curious to hear you articulate, are working in very abstract or relatively abstract grammars. And yet the topic of how that sort of visual experience that may be part of your background enters the work in terms of choices. And I wondered maybe if you could each maybe take a few minutes and talk us, sort of elaborate on that. Shirley, do you want to go first?
Okay. I mean, for me, I think that I chose to be an abstract painter because in a way it provided more freedom for me, because I think of abstract paintings as unfixed. It's not, of course, if you think of abstract paintings as just modernist formal paintings, then that's that. But I think abstract paintings have a lot of potential to signify changes in our culture and world and so on. So what I want is for abstract paintings to have value, to ourselves or to the world. And I think I want the work to create that value, rather than the narrative creating that value for the painting.
Well, and may I interrupt, sort of say, I mean, one of the places you and I have talked about this sometimes is that, the fact of your own also background of sort of growing up with Korean parents in Japan, born, I think, in Japan, and then moving to the US. And, we were talking at one point about your relationship to the sort of the different visual styles, even in, say, fashion or clothing, between, say, Koreans and Japanese, especially in terms of traditional dress, and then coming to the US and sort of, or, I'm going to very, I know, westernized schools, even in Japan. So sort of moving towards this Western painting tradition. It seems like that has also kind of is part of the story, and it's still evident perhaps in the kimono-like, I keep using this word marquetry, the sort of the fitting of shapes and the optical illusion aspects of the current paintings.
Yeah, I think the cultural, or my Asianness, or whatever you want to call it, probably appears in the way I construct paintings and the patterns and the colors that I choose. But it's something that is sensed, rather than something that you look at it and go, oh, I get it. It's more about an intuitive response. And just because I come from this other culture, I don't expect the viewer to immediately grasp or understand the different types of visual vocabularies that I'm familiar with. I would like the viewer, hopefully, to be able to sense something different about them. And so, I do literally, include a lot of I address differences and repetitions and so on to be able to focus on those ideas. So that's how the paintings are constructed.
Yeah. I also kind of really want to bring you in here, Lisa, because I suspect you have a somewhat different way of thinking about that, the sort of the place of, identity. You were talking about it also earlier about, I don't know, fluidity or, moving, adaptability. Can you say about how that perhaps informs or how you think about abstraction?
I don't think I chose abstraction. I started as a figurative painter. What occurred through my desire to talk about a particular experience was that abstraction was the only painting tool to use for that. And what I mean when I say that, I mean, as a light-skinned African-American woman, descended from Jefferson Davis, believe it or not, who grew up first in a Black neighborhood, then moved to an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and went to a white private school. I mean, it's like, how do you fix that, right? Like, it's a very specific, fluid history where I had to reshift my perceptions of things, and people in those environments had to decide their perceptions of me and what was going on there in that situation. So I couldn't make figurative paintings because there was no specific narration of, this is a person here, this is what they're doing, this is what they're eating. I really wanted to try to recreate the experience of destabilization, location, malleability, fluidity. That's what I'm trying to do. And so representation isn't a tool that helps me with that. So I slowly morphed, and those paper pieces you showed were an indication that there's still actual text and representation and drawing there, but what I'm relying on is really color, movement, shifting, placement, and so that's why abstraction is perfect, because I think there's a visceral way we navigate things that are at the core, which is what the abstract ultimately is, and the way we understand color.
It sort of makes me also think about, I don't know, I'm thinking about history and contemporaneity, or however you say that word. Thinking about how, and again, for both of you, how these works relate to a kind of very contemporary sort of space. I mean, we certainly now, we've been living in screens for so long, or in a kind of Photoshop world, which is, as many of you know, is sort of characterized by layers. It's not that sort of perspectival deep space, one unitary frame, and then everything's happening within that, but the stacking of things on top of one another, the looking at something through something else, or juxtaposed or in relation to. And I think in very different ways, both of you guys are doing that, or operating with that, or incorporating that. And it does sort of make me, want to ask you a little about how you think about what you're doing in relation to this time that we're living in. And maybe almost like whether you dream a little bit about what you want us, what kind of experience you want us to have, or what our side of the conversation is. And maybe just for symmetry, Shirley, I should let you go first, even though we're looking at you, Oh, I guess we're looking at me. I'm confused. Lisa, Shirley, do you want to take that question first?
Okay. I mean, for the specific group of paintings, I think I was quite conscious of wanting them to be as playful as possible. And I mean, you know, I think that my paintings in general tend to be playful, but I think of playfulness as another kind of emotion. It's another sort of emotive aspect of ourselves, and that, you know, we're living in an awful time, and I think of playfulness as a certain kind of antidote to all the awful things that, you know, seem to be going on. And it's, you know, we don't really have idealism per se anymore. We don't seem to believe in certain sets of values that can produce, you know, an idealized world. We've come to a completely different place. But at the same time, we don't have to reflect that in art. You know, it doesn't have to be completely reflected in art, but I think art is actually an arena where imagination, you know, is really important. And so it makes, you know, I would like the viewer to be able to have a certain kind of, I don't know, an experience that is perhaps, you know, enjoyable on some level, but perhaps ambiguous on another level. So there are contradictory, you know, things going on. So it's hard to obviously address, you know, the present through abstraction, but it's not impossible. I mean, there are, I think, you know, there are ways that we can think about the world through abstraction.
Totally. I mean, sometimes an analogy is exactly what we need. I mean, addressing things a little bit from an off angle. Lisa, what about you? How do you think about that question, or that jumble of questions?
I think painting has always come to a form of a given time, right? So the Renaissance looks like the Renaissance because of what society was interested in, and postmodernism looked like postmodernism because of globalism. And I certainly think that right now, people are grappling with the space of the computer, right? And how imagery and experience has shifted because of the computer. I certainly think about it. I think about the grounding of the work I'm doing was based on truth and fiction in relationship to perception of myself as a personal experience. But I certainly think truth and fiction are an issue and are a contemporary arena that we're living in. And so I am aware and interested in how the paintings also speak to that that destabilizing force of what is it, where is it, and should I trust it, and what do I need to trust it? So I do think about that. Aware of that being conversant in the work.
So maybe Chloe, I mean, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Shirley, both, you know, for this part of things. I think maybe we turn it back to you, Chloe, for possible questions. I don't know if there's anybody out there who's got, I haven't been tracking the chats, but.
That's great. So we have our first question is for Shirley, and it's from Jason in our audience. So I'm going to ask Jason to unmute here.
Hi there. Hi, Shirley.
Hi, Jason.
How are you? What a great talk. I'm going to try to find my question now. It's somewhere here in this chat. Yeah, I was curious if you could speak to the influence of heraldry, if that's an influence in the work somewhere. And a kind of second part of that question was whether or not a figure like Sonia Delaunay, maybe not necessarily stylistically, but in terms of the kind of maybe larger framework that she thinks of abstraction, a kind of idiosyncratic abstraction, if that appeals to you at all.
Absolutely. To answer your first question about heraldry, I think the shapes, in my older paintings, some of the shapes were distorted from your basic oval or circle or whatever, and it took on a kind of appearance of something like heraldry, but that's kind of a byproduct. It wasn't, I wasn't referencing that. The second question in terms of Sonia Delaunay and Sophie Taber-Arp, for example, in American abstraction, in the history of American abstraction, there aren't very many women, abstract painters that I sort of looked at, besides maybe what's her name? I'm now blanking her name. She did white paintings with the borders, the black borders.
Oh, Jo Baer.
Jo
Yeah.
Baer, exactly. I wasn't even interested in somebody like Helen Frankenthaler or Joan Mitchell. So I naturally sort of tended more towards European female abstract painters. And so I have been, looking at Sonia Delaunay's work and Sophie Taber-Arp for a while now. And I find their abstractions to be somewhat different from their male counterparts, even though they were practicing alongside, their husbands, for example, who are better known for the most part than they were. But even though they were practicing at the same time, I think that their work was different. They added a different kind of characteristic to them, and that's kind of what interests me.
Yeah, they're almost
they are
complex.
They are like the models, if you want to, if I have to name a model.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley, for that.
Sure.
The next question is from Barbara in the audience. Barbara, do you want to ask directly, or shall I ask? I can unmute you. Let me find you here.
Am I muted?
There, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. Lisa, I loved seeing your earlier pieces again and hearing you discuss the connection, which was much more, was much richer than I imagined it was, because I didn't know those pieces. But it was really, I just wondered if you wanted to elaborate on that, because you were also talking about the complicated space in them. In relation to the newer spatial decisions that you're making in these recent pieces.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure in there. I was talking about them differently than the space and the newer. I mean, I think the space and the newer pieces are more complex on some.
Yeah.
But I guess I was just trying to articulate that. This note, like there are threads from those works that continue forward. The only thing that doesn't continue forward are the depictions of different people and the evidence of different languages and the suggestion of skin tones. I felt that was too didactic in a way and too political. Because I don't think of my work as political work about race. I really think about it as my individual experience of my race and different cultures. And so I guess what I was saying about those earlier works, that the threads that have gone forward are this play or navigation or takedown of the grid, and how no matter how I combine things, I was almost destabilizing something that was very stable to begin with, like a page from a book or a silhouetted portrait. And so those kinds of abstract structures, I realized were really where the meat was for me, and that I should let go of something that could be more sociological or political. I really am trying to carry forth a question and a presentation of my own experience.
Thanks.
Great. Excuse the siren in the background. Our next question is from GE, our friend GE. So I'm going to unmute you, GE, so you can ask your question here.
Thank you so much, Chloe. And I love the divergence and also just the matchup of both of these artists. It's a wonderful pairing. My question is, in the way that each of your work relates to suggestions and abstraction, to even the esoteric and maybe even the hermetic traditions, is this a way to open up and perhaps interrogate inherited doctrines about it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
For me, yes.
Absolutely. I think that we don't, as an abstract painter or even just a painter, you know, the history is pretty, it's a pretty closed system. So, you know, it's impossible, I think, to ignore the history in our cases, abstract paintings. And, but we're obviously trying to find ways to do something different. And in the process of it, we may be critiquing what has happened in the past to some degree.
Yeah, that couldn't be, I thank you, Shirley. I think that was perfectly said. I also think it was, and to Shirley's earlier comment about the abstract women that she's looked at, it's a male zone. I mean, it's
exactly
primarily a male white zone. And so when I've subtly suggested taking it down, there is a little bit of a revolution for me in the studio and taking it down. So I think you hit both of our objectives, part of our objectives here. Yeah.
Thank you so very much. Thank you both.
Thank you for that. I'll ask the last question. I know that the show is on for a few more weeks, and I'm curious if each of you had to leave the audience with a question to think about in the back of their heads while they look at your works in the exhibition, what would it be?
Go, Shirley.
I don't know. That's a hard question.
A great question, though.
Well, I think, I don't know if it's a question, but I certainly hope that the audience will have an experience with the paintings that they may not have had previously, or at least a different kind of experience looking at our paintings. It's not a question. It's more like a desire on my part.
Yeah, I guess I'll go back to something I said earlier, is that I want the viewer to be at least equally aware of themselves, of their active choices and decisions while looking at the painting, and not the painting as a set of givens and facts. So I would like to ask everyone that goes to just try to pay attention to that and ask yourself the question, why are you assuming or feeling the things that you are?
Thank you. Thank you for that. And with that, at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. Today,
Sorry,
we're thrilled.
David Rich wants to ask a question. I don't know if there's time for him.
Oh, let's see. Yeah, we have a minute for David. David, I'm gonna unmute you here.
Thank you. I feel like a lot of this interfering with complacency and exactly what Lisa was just talking about, this keeping the painting conversational, rooted in listening. It's a call and response, and the supposedly abstract painting comes about as a resultant emerging from that dialogue. And that is so similar to why music is so crucial to many people in terms of really getting at an intimate level of our citizenship and humanity. And like that's one of the functions of this kind of painting, despite all the difficulties in actually getting that to happen. It comes out of a pre-verbal and a post-verbal engagement with our process of seeing and thinking and listening. And that's why the painting needs that fluidity of thought to function for the viewer as almost like some kind of psychic location device or some form of kinesthetic truth-telling. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, David. And with that, I am going to transition over to our poetry reading for today. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today we're thrilled to feature a video of Julie Patton reading a poem for PennSound. Before I show the poem to all of you, a little bit about her. Julie is a New York City-based poet and visual artist. She is also the founder of an eco-arts housing and land conservation project based near Detroit. Patton is the author of Using Blue to Get Black, Notes for Some Nominally Awake, and A Garden Perverse, or What Else Do You Expect from Dirt? And with that, I'm going to share my screen.
That's funny. I just thought I saw you Chicagoing in the study room. Jana skin birding in the basement. Wonder a bird didn't pick apart your bed, played in trilling introductape and Mocking Creek song. Something say Celia in you, ventrilo guest, half and half cramola. I sense you still, while the day's third act gums for more of you, presence, skin, while insisting a while longer than this pipe thin breath you somewhere in this building, memory agents, terror, mouth not worry, outrun berry, dreaming, can this be true? A real frank, hands-on hipster, take no poets, kind of blues about, you know who, what, the P-Funk, as in Pat Spears, Poe Project, pre-Bama, post-rash, take on, rare glimpse, perceptions. I am washing dishes with this ring on, candle flame, lit to star, well-tuned piano. I guess you must have recovered by now. It was late, and there I was, eating hajiki, branches out into decipher state space, reclaimed, first for homeless couple, and a pound of cats, then activists. So how? A bird's nest here in blessed memory, ample body of works made possible, inferior the day after the above project I went to. I went to paper house boxing, my heart in extra trail. Crossroads, temptress details, heat to green with cupped hands, part 7th Street paper spray. She melts up the trees, talking and typing at the same time. Missy Thou, that's how you often greet me. So color the imagination, talking to ourselves, just thinking of you and just how near or far you are. Leah lay Lila window now. I am a wondering and a wondering, I wonder where I can go. So navy blue, should have seen the lake today. Water so still, almost as if sky conjured up a mirror to see itself in. Bird shucking and jiving, all of a sudden encounter with themselves, take off on blue notes, inked in conversation, silhouette, mother-daughter, tit for tat. Peekaboo with Harriet Mullen over Guess Who blew in the window. Interview using blue to get black. What kind of blue you use to get water? Water color or the color of water, as in wet Terra H2O or watercolor. Any medium of do blue depends on the subject matter. But doesn't the medium matter much? Not really. Let's see. Blue, well, take that blue over there. Watercolor is a carrier of water. Proper blue. Add white to vary the tones. So you can get that cobalt blue pure. It's still a truish hue. Yes, the rest of the image determines which blue. Blue varies from moment to moment. Cobalt, ultramarine, cerulean has a tinge of green. There are other blues I could use. Primary of all the blues, most things I do seem to call for that kind of blue. Very true to me as a medium. It's a blue. You mean a medium bloom in green tween. I'm looking at that color over there in the background. Crap at that paint. At the same time, blue to blue, because water at a distance gets darker or lighter, just add streaks. I use that blue for figures all the time. Hue blue, blah bluish, depending on the intensity of the light surrounding things. There's a violet blue.
I don't think audio is coming through.
Don't have to be umbered.
Sorry about that. Did we miss the audio at the end?
Just for a moment there, yes.
Sorry about that, everyone. That was a lovely reading by Julie Patton. Let's see. We are happy to highlight our friends at PennSound and the remarkable work of Julie Patton today, and thank Ted Roeder, who recorded the video of Julie's reading. Thank you, Lisa, Shirley, and Steel. We also like to thank Kara Carmack at New York Studio School for helping make today's event possible. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful social and political meditations in our monthly publication and in our public events, like here in our daily New Social Environment. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. if you're free for a conversation on Ellsworth Kelly at Matthew Marks Gallery with Yvan Lambois, Robert Storr, and Phyllis Tuckman. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Barrett White. And you can now turn on your microphones and say goodbye as we all leave this room together where we've been sharing ideas.
Thank
all so
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Bye, Lisa. Goodbye.
Everyone.
Bye, Sheila.
Bye, thank you.
Goodbye.
Nice talk. Enjoyed
Bye-bye.
that a lot.
Thank Fabulous talk.
Thank
you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Lisa. Bye, Shirley. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
bye.
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 Thanks for joining and go see the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks a
Bye,
million.
Steel.
Bye, bye. Thanks, Chloe. Thanks, the rail. Thank you, Fong.
Yeah.
The ghost of Fong. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Steel. That was really wonderful and great to hear about.
Conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, it was lovely. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Lunchtime.
Bye.